Company of Heroes 3. The latest entry into a series that a lot of people have a great deal of emotional connection to, myself included, and perhaps even more so with its creator, Relic. They were responsible for revolutionizing the RTS genre not once but twice with Dawn of War 2 and Company of Heroes 1. And so naturally expectations for their games are sky high, or at least they were, as lately they have not been living up to their fans' standards. Oh, well, that is somewhat underselling the point, now isn't it? Dawn of War 3 was an insult, a betrayal of trust, and a solid skyscraper-sized middle finger. And so, Company of Heroes 3 must be nothing short of absolute excellence if it was going to save Relic's reputation. And judging by the initial reception, it has not reached those lofty heights. And in parts, this is a little bit unfair. Because Company of Heroes 3 is not a bad game. Not at all. In fact, I would say that mechanically, Company of Heroes 3 is probably damn near the best Company of Heroes games ever. And certainly the best on launch day. Having played through the launch of COH2 in particular, 3 is miles ahead, no doubt about it. Many of my key and core complaints about the Company of Heroes series no longer exist in 3. The sudden RNG explosion of an infantry unit due to a lucky random mortar round, for example, or the feeling that you sometimes just didn't have enough time or warning to retreat a squad before they got splattered all over the landscape. The general pacing of Company of Heroes 3 is pretty much exactly what I've always wanted. Fights are long, but not too long. They can be rather snappy, in fact, if a good hand grenade is delivered or a fine flank is executed. But I've never felt, not once in COH3, that my unit has simply just disappeared because of something random that landed on them. In fact, short of being hit by a full call-in artillery barrage, I don't think units can be one-shotted anymore. The tank combat too has slowed down a fair old bit, but again, not too slow. I'm very fond of the pacing, though certain abilities, well, there are some balance issues because, well, it's a Relic game. Relic's opinion on balance has always been a fascinating one, and there are certain aerial call-ins that can be ludicrously devastating, tearing down heavy tanks in single barrages, leaving them either dead or on a scrap of HP. To counter this, anti-air is very powerful and perhaps a little bit too powerful, as certain AA positions can pick off incoming aircraft seemingly before they're even on screen sometimes, so yes, there is definitely some balance issues, but despite this, again, mechanically, the game is rather excellent, and it has introduced so many things that the fanbase has been crying out for years and years. More focus on medium armor, for example, the introduction of the Panzer III, making heavy tanks rarer, reducing the lethality and randomness of combat a bit, making it more predictable, adding in towed weaponry, adding in something other than just the Americans and the British with the Italians here, although I still would have liked to see a full Italian campaign as well. And a little bit of a side note here too, on the point of greed. Is Company of Heroes 3 going to be a DLC platform? Yes, undoubtedly so. They talked about a lot of doctrines, for example, and special call-in units that are not in the campaign at the moment, so undoubtedly these are going to be added over the course of the game's life cycle. But, well, at some point we've got to recognize that this is simply how video games are done these days, and I will point out, Company of Heroes 3 launched without an in-game shop. When was the last time you saw that? Hell, most of the time, the in-game shop is in the early access version of the video game. And yet here, it's not actually in on day one. It sounds like such a stupid thing to praise the game for, and it is, but it is a bit of an indication of intent, in my opinion. and I genuinely do believe that Relic is trying to put their best and most fan-pleasing foot forward with COH 3. They have given us practically everything we have ever wished for, so why are we so displeased? Well, there's a couple reasons. First and foremost, this might make it sound as if Relic is merely the unfortunate victim in all of this, and they are not. The reception of Company of Heroes 3, despite the full-on competence and, in certain cases, excellence of the game, is due to Relic's own incredibly poor marketing decisions. It is due to Dawn of War 3. It is due to cancelling support of Dawn of War 3 in a letter that practically blamed the fans for the cancellation of the game's vast and expansive DLC plans. And again, this was a massive economic hit to Relic, which essentially forced them into contract work for Microsoft for a while there, but we were not the ones who screwed up Dawn of War 3, not by any extent of the imagination. And that game, and the fact that it provided something that literally nobody had ever even thought of asking for, well, it is a mistake that is going to hang, rightfully so, over Relic's head for a very, very long time. And so, with the reservoirs of fan faith so completely and utterly scraped dry and bare, it's unsurprising that many do not wish to give Relic the benefit of the doubt anymore. And there are elements of Company of Heroes 3 too that are rather disappointing as well. The mechanics, as I said, are excellent. In fact, I think it might be one of the best Company of Heroes games straight up, in my opinion. But the presentation of it, the design, the color coordination, the visuals, the audio, all lets the game down. From simple, basic things like the lack of color theory, for example. When you turn on unique player colors, you might end up with allies being red and enemies being blue, rather than the logical idea of having all allies be shades of blue or green, and all enemies be shades of red to orange, for example. They've also removed the ability to see player names on units, so you kind of have to guess who is who and who their color is. They've also hidden unit kills a little bit by forcing you to hover over the XP bar to see it, which, considering the size of the unit information window, is just kinda silly, frankly. There is also the design of the unit themselves, the visuals. The units look drab and bland and boring, which is interesting because most of them are actually colored in fairly bright pastel-style colors, which actually make the game look worse. It doesn't make it look more colorful necessarily. In fact, you give the units camouflage to the point that some of them are actually kind of difficult to see. A problem I never had in Company of Heroes 1 or 2. The art direction on many of the tanks too, their colors, their shading is just a little off, as if everything has this weird filter over it, where you almost expect there to be a lighting setting that might fix it all, as if the scene is not properly illuminated, or as if the textures are not properly applied. The textures themselves are also in many cases remarkably low res, having even some strange effects on them. For example, if you zoom in close on, at the very least, the American headquarters tent, you will see kind of like a semi-transparent fuzzy texture placed on it, and it's just weird. You've also got other presentation issues, like there is a bug from the beta, which is still in the game, where so occasionally the wheels of trucks will simply not spin, which is just jarring and weird and amateurish as well. There's also the sound design. Company of Heroes 1 was famous for amazing sound design, all kinds of awesome battlefield chatter and great music. COH 2 upped the game in terms of effects, like the sound of the Nebelwerfers, for example, were just wow, blows you away. COH 3 just sounds okay. Mediocre. It lacks character. Bazookas sound practically the same as tank cannons. The flamethrower has a little whoosh effect, but it's not a big whoosh. The weapons, too, are a little bit of plinky-plonky side. Even artillery barrages lack that stunning impact of the previous games. And as for the voiceovers, well, I mentioned in my coverage of the beta, and there was one funny voice line that the Americans had. Oh, you're sweating like a whore in church. Was like, that was a pretty good one. Now, they keep saying it all the time. As if somebody was listening in on that. Like, yeah, we should go one. Play that one. Constantly. And I frankly haven't heard another one that would really sounded good. In fact, most of their little sayings just make me think back to better Company of Heroes ones. And there were so many more voice lines too. Like, you can find YouTube compilation videos for like 13, 14, 15 minutes of just continuous voice lines from like single factions. There's so much, and they're so cool, and they're changing based on the unit's position and circumstance as well. If they're taking fire, for example, in Gear North, they might shout back at you like, why are you doing this? It's great. The audio design has always been one of Relic's strongest points, and it's just not shining through in Company of Heroes 3. There's also the weird fact that, again, much of the texture works makes the game look almost like a modded version of COH1, with some of it being just kind of awful. Like, the damage effect on certain vehicles are just blatant, stupid little 2D textures, making it look as if the vehicle was submerged in water and started growing barnacles instead of anything, damage related. Again, the pastel colors too, it makes the units lack character and gravitas. The fact that many of them are also wearing matching uniforms, where you can see Africa Corps troopers with pants in one color, jackets in another, and helmets in a third. And hey, I'm sure that might be historically accurate, because, they've never had access to perfect uniforms, yada yada, but it makes the unit look grubby, dirty, and not at all, disciplined and army-like. Whereas in Company of Heroes 1, everybody's wearing pretty much the same uniform. You can identify a Volksgrenadier from a Panzergrenadier immediately, for example, or a Knight's Cross guy. I know the Knight's Cross guys were hardly historically accurate, but they looked awesome. And in this game, we actually have a lot of call-in units as well. Here's the thing. Okay. I am ripping into the game a fair bit when it comes to the audio and visual, because that is honestly my main argument points. The new doctrine system I really like. It's when Relic says that it's the best of both worlds from COH 2 and 1, I actually agree. Like, you can set up loadouts when there are more doctrines available, and then you can pick them dynamically in-game. Great. So long as they avoid the COH 2 thing, where they will take one unit and put it in that doctrine, and that doctrine, and that doctrine, and then no others, just switching around singular abilities to actually make good, unique doctrines, I think that will be just excellent. There is also the ability to customize units in-game, which I'm all for. You can argue that it's a bit nickel-and-dimey, sure, but so long as the prices are fair, I have always argued that I am all for paying like $1 or $2 to make my units look completely different. I'm more than happy to see that. There's also the fact that COH 3 at launch has more content than any previous Relic game, I think. 4 factions right off the bat, 14 maps and 2 campaigns, one of which is the dynamic Italian campaign, where you lead the Allied armies in the invasion of Italy, with a whole heaping heck of a lot of unique mechanics as well. You can call in bombers and fighters and artillery strikes. You can attach detachments to your units. They have their own veterancy trees. You can give them special abilities. You can see cooperation between various divisions to give them bonuses and special in-game abilities. It's a very competent and cool campaign. Sadly, it leaves the African campaign completely in the dust, because okay, the African campaign. It's alright in its generalized mission structure. It's a simple narrative mission-by-mission campaign. And they're okay. Again, the general visuals and the audio of the game lets it down, but as far as missions goes, there's nothing particularly wrong with them. What lets it down is the story. You would think that a story about the Africa Corps would be centered around, well, the Africa Corps. It isn't. it's told from the perspective of the Arab people. From that one trailer, you remember? It's told from the perspective of the British. It's just weird. I guess in the current year, you can't present the Germans as just people, I guess, and so you need to present their story through somebody else's eyes? That's just dumb. It's a very contrived thing. Like, oh, war from the perspective of a civilian. I don't care. I'm playing the Africa Corps. And obviously, when you're playing the Allies in Italy, none of that nonsense is happening. Of course not. Then you are the conquering heroes, and the rebellion is coming to help you. That's another thing too. Again, I love the loyalty system, where you can agree or disagree with commanders or do things in their way, and they will give you special unlocks. Nice as a way to build a little bit of relationship with your little commanders. I wish they were properly animated, mind you. The various little cutscenes, etc. the game have are just not very good. When they use in-game footage, they make it all fuzzy and blurry for some reason again. It doesn't make it look any better. And then when they're doing the quote-unquote proper cutscenes, they're 2D there's like live 2D animations where they just kind of wiggle some 2D drawings, and they don't even do it well. They look awful. They look cheap. They certainly don't look like they were made by a major studio for a major video game. Definitely not. And the focus on the resistance as well, because of course it is the current year, and so you will see black soldiers fighting alongside white soldiers in the US Army, for example. The Italian partisans will have tons of women fighting alongside them on the front line as well. And the Italian resistance movement didn't do a whole lot. The most of the Italian resistance was usually carried out by Italian soldiers, usually in reaction to fairly overt German aggression as Germany moved to de facto demilitarize the country and take it over via coup, essentially. The most standout large-scale action that involved the resistance was probably the Battle, quote-unquote, of Naples, where they interfered with the retreat of German troops from the city, harassed them, essentially. It had some grand total of a few hundred casualties. That was about the biggest thing they ever did. It makes very little sense to focus an entire section of the campaign on them and then not give the Italians an army. Like, the Italian army itself has received zero coverage. They simply have a couple of doctrines given to the Wehrmacht with a handful of units and a few vehicles here and there. Like, and a campaign, a game set in Italy in World War II and Africa with no Italian army is just weird. And made even weirder by the obvious focus on the Italian resistance. As if the game is trying to say, like, oh, them evil Nazis, they were the only bad guys of World War II, you see. The Italians didn't actually like them or anything. They allied with them because they didn't know any better. But they were totally fighting for freedom. What's that? The majority of the Italian resistance was made up of communists and socialists? Oh well. For your information as well, there were quite a lot of women in the Italian resistance, some 20 to 30 odd thousand, but almost none of them, a tiny, vanishingly small percentage, took part in combat operations, because frankly, it'd be a waste. But, again, it is the current year. And I suppose we're all getting rather used to it at this point. So, all in all, to wrap up and make some conclusions here, Company of Heroes 3 is a game with excellent bones. It has a fine bone structure. It has a great body, but an awful face, a terrible presentation, and not a very good personality either. When playing the game, you kind of feel disappointed. I feel like, well, I'm playing Company of Heroes, and you know, it feels like Company of Heroes, and it plays like Company of Heroes, but every time I look at the game, I don't feel like it's Company of Heroes. I feel like it's some kind of knockoff variant made of Company of Heroes. Some sort of, you know, second-grade studio that was farmed out to create a Company of Heroes-like style video game, and they just didn't have access to the good artists from the main studio. There's also lots of little things too, like, for example, the paratroopers constantly work the bolts of their M14s, the wheels of the trucks don't spin, the dynamic animations of the units running around and jumping into cover is somewhat lacking as well, though still there, mind you. It's just, their movements are a bit stiffer, their graphics a little bit meh. It's just, the entire presentation feels like a slight step backwards, not just from Company of Heroes 2, but frankly from Company of Heroes 1 even. And again, the color direction, the art director needs to take a lot of the flack for this, where everything just looks diffuse, ill-defined, and as if by some mistake they pushed out the game without the high resolution textures. In other words, Company of Heroes 3 is a damn fine body, some solid bones, but an awful face, and there is no paper bag large enough to cover it up. And it certainly falls well beneath the standard that Relic has set for itself in previous releases. In all due likelihood, the studio is simply no longer what it once was. They've demonstrated here an ability to recreate the gameplay of preceding games, but they don't have the art direction anymore. They don't have the overall leadership to develop and deliver the complete package of voice lines, of visuals, of gameplay mechanics, and the occasional DLC content, of course. I certainly would not go so far as to not recommend Company of Heroes 3. If you are a fan of the Company of Heroes series, then this is absolutely something you should consider. Because many people might ask, why shouldn't I simply keep playing Company of Heroes 2? Well, the main reason is because COH 3 will be a more vibrant game. It is probably going to have a more active player base, and it is going to receive continuous updates. And it'll probably have better doctrine systems than COH 2. Plus, having played COH 2 a fair few hours myself, that game, it had some mechanics and some balance issues of its very own. It was hardly a perfect game. Nor, mind you, is Company of Heroes 3 either, but I genuinely feel like it might actually have the potential to become closer to that perfection. Only time will tell, however, and as always, you will lose absolutely nothing by waiting 6 months for a sale, and maybe a look at the DLC planning and whether or not Relic is even going to continue supporting the game. Now, pre-Dawn of War 3, I would say that there was no way they wouldn't, but, well, we are post Dawn of War 3, and they've done it before, so they might do it again. Though I do not believe for a second that COH 3 is anywhere near the same scale of disaster that Dawn of War 3 was. So from me, this is going to be a cautious recommendation, with the added caveat that, again, the multiplayer scene, if it's truly worth it, will be just as vibrant in 6 months as it will be tomorrow. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.